What about the word empathy stood out to you?
Actually, it wasn't the word, it was what it represented. It was the lack of it rather than the existence of it. I didn't know what it was. I mean, the reality is that empathy is a skill set. It's actually built into your prefrontal cortex in your brain. You're born with it. And it's a pro-social skill set. So, us humans, we all have it in order to survive, literally to protect the existence of the human race. The deficit of it has huge impacts on our society, whether it's in areas of mental health, disconnection at work, loneliness. So 52% of us are lonely. And we know that lonely people die 8 years earlier, all the way to suicide. The second biggest killer of our youth is no longer vehicle accidents, but suicide. If our children are choosing not to stay on the planet with us, we have a problem. And perhaps this lack of empathy, this lack of understanding of each other, this inability to listen to each other is a huge part of the problem. So it wasn't so much the word empathy or the concept of empathy that appealed to me, but the reality when we don't have it. And my role and my hope to be able to fill those gaps was what drove me to pick up the empathy flag and start running.
Guys, welcome to the Rubasha Family Podcast. Now, I have a very, very special guest in the building. We have Mimi Nicklin. She's the CEO of Empathy Everywhere, and she has a top five rated podcast with the Mimi You Show, international best-selling author with not only one book, but I believe around three books. Is that correct, Mimi?
You have three now, somehow.
Three books. That's really amazing. And, here we encourage CEOs to build their personal brand. So when it comes to a personal brand, I mean, you're leading the way. I mean, having a book, having content out there, you have your own show, speaking around the world. And it's really amazing. When I first connected you on LinkedIn, what stood out to me, really, which I really liked, was Chief Empathy Officer. So really, really powerful. And I really want to get into this conversation.
Oh, well, thank you. And you know what's amazing is that even now, when people talk about personal brand and me in the same sentence, I'm always like, are you sure? And they're like, yeah, that is your personal brand. But I find it such a brave term, and I think maybe for so many CEOs, there's like a confidence thing in there when you're like, really, me, a brand? So thank you for the feedback and thank you for noticing, because as I said, even though I'm 5 years into this, sometimes I still need reminding, like you're doing it, Mimi. So yeah, so I'm so happy for the invitation. Thank you for having me.
No worries at all. And just before we go into like about your story and how much we can extract so much value from you, how did you get into that thing of building your personal brand unintentionally? Because it seems like you've just been doing it because you just want to express yourself. But like you said, when now I said that to you, it's like, oh wow, yes, I am a key person of influence and I have built my brand. So what kind of clicked in your psychology to go down that route?
Yeah, I mean, Sugira, the reality is for me that empathy, this work in empathy, this commitment or desire, both, to create more empathy in our world is just part of who I am. I get up to do this literally every day, Sunday, Christmas Day, every day, So I often say to people, I don't believe in balance, for example, when people talk about work-life balance, because for me, there's only me, right? If we meet on the beach, in a pub, on an aeroplane, or here, is exactly the same. There's no like work Mimi and personal Mimi. There's just Mimi, right? So I think you're right. It was a little bit inadvertent. What I knew and was very conscious about was what my passion and my purpose were, right? Which is this belief that the more the world talks about empathy, the more empathy the world will have. And that drives me. So you'll see in my content all kinds of content that talks about empathy. Often it's in leadership, but it might also be in community, in teaching, in education, in the community. I do quite a lot of community work. So I always lead with my passion. And I think on the back of that, I guess that personal brand came to life. But as you said, I didn't set out to be a personal brand. That kind of came separately.
Wow. So can you take us all the way back? How did you even start? How did you get to where you are?
Yeah, sure. So in I had a corporate career in advertising in branding for my entire career from a corporate point of view. That led me to Asia nearly 20 years ago. So I spent nearly 20 years, my whole career really, in Asia Pacific and Africa. So I've lived in many countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Dubai, Colombo, Malaysia, all over the place, right? So I've had a very global journey, but always on the sort of east side of the world. And in 2018, I took a role in Dubai, and it was a regional CEO role for a large global brand, but a regional team in that brand. Um, and the honest truth, Sugira, was that when I got to that job, it wasn't quite what they had told me it would be. And this business was significantly underperforming. And I had come out of very global organizations where we had large finance teams. You know, you're never alone. There's always people to support finance, procurement, legal, whatever. And suddenly I was thrown into this environment where I had to lead what was basically an independent small business. I became an entrepreneur, but it wasn't like a choice, right? It just became that. Um, and honestly, I was very overwhelmed. I didn't have then the skill sets that I needed to be that type of CEO, you know, which was a very entrepreneurial, lone wolf kind of role. And in that journey, I met with a business coach, and I was asking her, can you help me work out how to do business in the Middle East? This is a different world. And Dubai has come a long way in 6 years, 7 years. So it was quite a different city then in 2018. And she asked me a question that changed my life. So she asked me about my leadership, and I was talking about intuition, being an intuitive leader. And she stopped me and she said to me, Mimi, is it intuition or is it empathy? And at the time, I said, no, 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 it's not empathy. You know, what's empathy got to do with business? But fundamentally, Sugira, that question changed my life. I left that lunch. I discovered something called the empathy deficit, which is the lack of connectivity in our world. It was actually coined by Barack Obama in 2006. And I started to write, and that writing became a best-selling book. I launched a podcast, and 85,000 people came, and my life changed. And I believe now very much that empathy, that purpose, found me rather than the other way around. So I wasn't out there searching for my purpose. I think it became me, and it's now been 5 years.
Wow. So let me ask you, what about the word empathy stood out to you?
Gosh, that's a great question, because actually it wasn't the word, it was what it represented. And specifically in the beginning, it was the lack of it rather than the existence of it. So when I left that lunch and someone had said to me, you know, maybe you're using empathy, I didn't know what it was. I mean, the reality is that empathy is a skill set. It's actually built into your prefrontal cortex in your brain. You're born with it. And it's a pro-social skill set. So us humans, we all have it in order to survive, literally to protect the existence of the human race. So the deficit of it, and we have lost actually 48% of it over 30 years, so a lot, nearly half of it, has huge impacts on our society, whether it's in areas of mental health, disconnection at work, loneliness. So 52% of us are lonely. And we know that lonely people die 8 years earlier, all the way to suicide. And I remember really clearly the day right close to that first lunch where I found some data that showed that the second biggest killer of our youth is no longer vehicle accidents, but suicide. And I remember just thinking to myself, if our children are choosing not to stay on the planet with us, we have a problem. And perhaps this lack of empathy, this lack of understanding of each other, this inability to listen to each other is a huge part of the problem. So it wasn't so much the word empathy or the concept of empathy that appealed to me, but the reality when we don't have it. And my role and my hope to be able to fill those gaps was what drove me to pick up the empathy flag and start running.
Hmm. So my question is, like you said, empathy is a skill set which I've never heard of before. That's
Yeah.
really, really, I've always thought empathy was something that you've had to learn. Like I had to learn how to have empathy, and I still struggle with that when I get frustrated about whether it's a family member, someone in my team, at least someone within my team now. I've gotten to be able to have more empathy. I think it's more harder when it comes to personal relationships to have that empathy. Or I'm just speaking from my experience because I know what it's like to, like work and put in something and I can understand someone. But empathy is a skill set and it's
Yeah.
something that we're all born with, we all have. So why is it so hard for us to do, like I said in that example? But then again, yeah, I'm really intrigued on the skill set part. And You know?
And look, Sarah, you're not alone in that let's say misunderstanding or lack of understanding around what it is, right? Because and that's what so much of my work is. I stand on these stages of my biggest ever audience is about 5,000 people. It was just about 2 weeks ago. And I stand there and I look at this. I mean, 5,000 is like I don't know, like it's a lot of people. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
2 weeks ago, I stood on the stage and you actually have to kind of look, 180 to see all these people that are looking at me to say, all right, then tell us what it is. And I would say 70% of them, it's not that they're against empathy, they just don't know what it is, right? And perhaps they think it's emotion, or they think it's a soft skill, or they think it's sympathy or compassion, right? So it isn't very well understood, which is why I do this work. But because it's a skill set, because it is pro-social. So think of it like this. We couldn't, I don't know, build a table, right? Build a house alone. I mean, you probably could, but you would need somebody to help, right? You would need somebody to make the bricks, somebody to give you the materials for the cement. As lone people, we don't do very well. We're not meant to be alone, right?
Mm,
We are pro-social. We do better together, which is why the pandemic was so hard. It's why people in solitary confinement literally get physically ill, right? We're not meant to be alone. So the role of this skill set that we're born with is to enable us to create relationships, to connect with others, to understand.
mm,
It is actually, Sugira, it's data. I always say this to CEOs I work with. This is not a soft skill, okay? Hard to find, hard to master, as you were saying, hard to maintain.
mm,
So, and it has hard business results. For example, we know that organizations that have empathy, that use empathy, see 23% higher profits. So, and there's so much data I could spiel data all afternoon, but it is a hard impact on the business world. And I think a big reality for our empathy work is just sort of rebranding, which is what you were touching on, education, telling people what this is. And empathy has two great enemies, and Sugira, you touched on one of them. One is low time. That's what you were saying. The other is high stress. And if we ask your audience today to put their hands up, who has low time and high stress? 90% of people are going to say, yeah, me. Right? It's the rat race that we're living in. So you're right. It's not easy. It's simple, but it's
mm,
not always easy to use your empathy.
mm. Wow. So, by the way, when you said 5,000 people, was that the one in Dubai?
That was in Malaysia the week before.
Malaysia. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
But I was in Dubai just
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing it on LinkedIn and I love it. I love the way, you're on LinkedIn and we'll talk about that later. So, okay, talk about now, of course, you found your purpose. Okay, like yes, empathy and the power of that. But how did you make this into a business? Yes, you went into write books and like how did you make this into a business and like what is your business model?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing to say is it didn't start as a business. It
Mhm.
started as a passion. And a passion and a platform. And I still call it a platform today. Sometimes people say, tell me about being an entrepreneur. And I'm like, am I an entrepreneur? I don't know. I don't really feel, I don't know what an entrepreneur feels like, but I don't feel like one. So for me, it was always a passion and a platform that I wanted to create that people would be able to come to expand their empathy, to be able to understand more about what this is and why we need it, why our businesses need it, why our children need it, why all of us need it. And I was very lucky in that I had a full-time job for the last 5 years. So, as I said, I always worked in branding and in advertising. So, for the last 5 years, I have basically had two jobs. I have been doing my corporate role, which helps because you have stability and security and salary and all the S's. Um, and I was able to build this passion on the side. And there was never any conflict because teaching empathy has no impact on branding clients. But of course, as those years went on, my time became the challenge. I just no longer had the time to be on a plane to a stage in Saudi Arabia at the same time as in a client meeting for my branding business. So, in the last 6 months, I've had to separate that out. And now I do this full time. But I think, is it easy to have two jobs? No. But what it did enable me to do is that when I got to the point where I wanted to do this full time and use it to make money to sustain my life, I had so much depth because I'd been doing it for 5 years. So it wasn't like I was starting from scratch. So if you go to my LinkedIn or my Instagram or my website, as you touched on, you will see endless work. I've worked with unbelievable clients and I was able to do some of that paid, some of it free because it wasn't my lifeblood at that time. It was passion. If Coca-Cola asked me to come speak to them about empathy, I said, sure, where's the door? I'll come in. So today, to answer your question, my business model is predominantly keynote speaking. So most of my work is in audiences and stages and speaking, and I just love it. People always ask me to get nervous. I don't get remotely nervous. I just absolutely love it. And I also do a lot of masterclasses and workshops. And I also do some executive dinners as well now. So fundamentally, the teaching of empathy into the corporate world is where I get my money. And I use that money to have a team around me that helps me continue to build the brand and all of the content that you see online, because of course I couldn't do it all on my own.
And do you also work like privately, like with CEOs, with, leaders as well? Is
Oh,
that part of what you do?
I do. I never did. It's funny. I spent like 3 years saying no. I said, no, I'm not a coach. No, I'm not a coach. And then about a year and a half ago, a CEO said to me, I don't, let me be clear. He was very blunt. He was very nice. He was very blunt. He said, let me be clear. I don't care what you are or what you aren't. I don't care what qualification you have. I would like you to work with me for a month. So I was like, okay. So I said yes. And that did begin a bit of a ripple effect. So now I do executive coaching with senior leaders as well, in a very different format, I think, from the market. But it's not my lifeblood. I do it because I love people. But really, the core of my work is in reach, anything with reach, right? An audience, a podcast. I write for a lot of Forbes and Harvard Business Review and the BBC. Anywhere where there's opportunity to create more empathy, I say yes.
Mm, mm.
I say
And
yes to everything.
yeah, I love that. And just before I ask more practical steps on how leaders can apply empathy with your work, working with CEOs and leaders and, the high level, what are some traits that you see in common? Like, what are some traits that you see in common with high level CEOs in what they're doing and how that can impact, the listener who's listening to this, whether they are a high level CEO or someone who aspires to be there?
Look, I mean, I think the first kind of, when you say, trend or insight, what are you seeing? The first thing is not necessarily a positive thing, but I see a huge amount of overwhelm. I think being a leader today, being a CEO today is a lot. And I often say this, often I'll be on like a panel on a stage with other leaders and I'll look at them and I'll say, I feel for you, right? Because once upon a time, not that long ago, a CEO was responsible for the P&L, right? The bottom line, finances, customers, and their people, culture. That was it. Now, on top of all of that, in a very volatile world in terms of, political, economic, financial reality, on top of all of that, they must have policies for diversity and inclusion and well-being and gender balance and LGBTQI and maternity leave and paternity leave and menopause leave. And there is so many things that as a CEO and as a leader today that we are meant to be specialists in order to create the workforce of today. And these are all phenomenal things to do, but it's a lot, right? So I guess the one thing that I see today from the CEOs I work with is that their role is incredibly multifaceted, that they have a wider breadth of, skill sets and responsibilities than they ever have had.
Mm.
And as I said, I think the trend is that it is quite overwhelming. There is a huge amount of burnout. There is a huge amount of exhaustion. And in terms of people that are aspiring to do that and perhaps do it better in the next generation, I teach a lot of self-empathy. I think, empathy has two parts: empathy for others and then empathy for yourself. And mastering that empathy for yourself, I always tell people, Sugira, that to slow down, to be able to slow down is a superpower, right? It is your best way to speed up. And I think if you can take that into leadership with you and just be able to find that time to understand yourself, once you know you, what you need, what you want, what helps you thrive, what drives you, you are far better at leading others and making that potential overwhelm at the top feel less overwhelming and much more manageable. So I think working on yourself and your self-empathy as you go up the ranks, and you're building a personal brand, really knowing yourself and being consistent with that is magic, actually.
But yeah, just to on that thought, yes, and when I think about it, like I started to think about even personal branding, because even for me, I intentionally went on that journey or unintentionally, sorry. And it's like I'm discovering myself in front of the world. Like you really are discovering yourself. You don't have all the answers. When I show up here, I'm extremely vulnerable. I'd say if I'm having a bad day, it's that authenticness, but it's so true. You're discovering who you are. And when you discover who you are and show that to people, it brings this power and this energy that you wake up every morning like you are, and the way you have the smile and brightful colors, it brings that energy out of you. So I wanted to ask you, how does one slow down? What is like how does one slow down with what they're doing? A lot of our CEOs, a lot of the clients I work with, they're time poor. It's extremely go, go, go. And one thing that I saw a quote and it stuck with me, it was like, you are a mirror of your clients. And then I started to look at all our CEO clients and I'm like, that's so true. I'm like them as well. And that's why we get along. I'm like them. And that's why I'm able to help them with their personal brand. So how does one slow down when your brain's always racing? Sometimes I can't even sleep because I'm excited. It's not stress, but yes, there's a lot. So how does one slow down to be able to thrive, like you were saying?
I resonate, by the way, with your point. I can't sleep because I'm so excited. I'm the same. It's not stress. It's just like, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so many things. Look, I think the answer, the simple answer is intentionally, right? That in one word, the way to slow down is to have the intention to do that. And I want to be really kind of clear about the way I slow down because I think probably my audience would say, don't lie. You never slow down. We watch you like you did at the beginning. Like, where are you today? Which plane are you on today? There is no slow Mimi in your world. But within the busy, I try to slow down, right? And I think that's why I say it's very intentional. So I have time in the morning because my time zones, the way I work around the world, I work very late night. So the beginning of the day, I have a very clear hour between 9 and 10 every morning, which is just for coffee, LinkedIn, my time, reflection, really, really important. So kind of segregation of the day, I think is very important. I also have days of the week where I specifically make sure I don't go into the office until I've done the work I want to do for myself, for example, the gym, the sauna, whatever it is that I do for my own well-being. I have to schedule that in. Um, I now more and more have very, again, intentional, specific choices around how I spend my time in the working day. And I know, so I get my energy from other people. It's really, really important. So if I have a full day of PowerPoint and spreadsheets and, kind of administrative work, my energy goes, I need this. I need to meet you, right? I need to meet other people and have conversations. So I'm very clear about, I mean, this is slowing down, right? This is an hour in a room with you. I'm not running, I'm not presenting to clients, I'm not making decks. I'm just talking to you about stuff that I love. So that's why I talk about self-empathy. I think slowing down is different for everyone, but you have to find that way to recalibrate. I'm a bit like you. I'm not good at actually physically stopping, right? Ask me to sit by a swimming pool for a day, I struggle, right? So I think what slowing down means to people is also different, but it has to be that moment when you can think, where you can actually get some vision, because otherwise you go from email to WhatsApp to email to WhatsApp to email to WhatsApp, and the day goes by. So you've got to be very clear about what that means to you.
Powerful. I really love some of the like I was really intrigued also with the hour to yourself. Like I really try to do that a lot of times through reading, but sometimes it can be hard because then that you're just one text message away from okay, boom,
Yeah.
I can go in and help or do something like that. So I think that's yeah. So spending that 1 hour with yourself,
Yeah, it's true. And as I said, I don't meditate, for example, and I ironically I often tell people they should, right? I know the science of meditation. I know how powerful it is for people who are really busy. For me, it doesn't work. It's just not my way. But for somebody else, it might be, right? For somebody else to actually make that quiet time work, they need to meditate or do yoga or whatever it is. For different people, it's different ways. I fly a lot. So for me, aeroplanes are quiet time, right? They, unfortunately, most of them have Wi-Fi now, but the ones that don't, no one can reach you. And I will really plan that 7 hours or 10 hours on the plane. I quite enjoy it, right? It's my time. So again, I think it's about choices, looking at the day, looking at the week, looking at where you live, what you have, what your family needs, and finding the slots that refuel you. So self-empathy first.
self-empathy. And just going back onto what you do on the business side, how does one attract those opportunities to be a speaker? Like how does, because I think for me, like that's another powerful core concept when it comes to personal branding. And I tell CEOs all the time, if you continue to put in the reps, if you continue, like for example, we do things where we give our clients to host a workshop, we get the content, boom, let's go. And I believe that's a great way for you to continue to show your expertise answering questions. But like just advice from you, because you know you've been doing it. That's something I have aspirations to do as well. How does one go towards that trajectory? I mean, how did it happen for you?
It's funny how many people ask me this now. I think there's a couple of things. I think momentum leads to momentum. So my first piece of advice is to start. And I really believe that, Sugira. I saw you kind of write it down. I think it's critical. If you create momentum, momentum comes, right? It is cyclical. So especially as a woman, as a female leader, there's a lot of rhetoric out there in the media, particularly the Western media, that will tell you not to do things for free, right? There's a very strong feminist messaging track, and I agree that in equal rights and all of those things, but the track will tell you never do anything for free, hold your value, be paid what you're worth, all of this very kind of aggressive language. But I always felt the other way. If I don't get out and do it, how's anyone ever going to know that I can do it? So how can I ask for money for something that nobody's seen me do? So the beginning of that journey for me was just to speak at every opportunity that I had. So everyone that ever asked me to, even if I didn't want to talk about it, right? I just knew I had to get out there and start talking. And I guess the second part of it, and you touched on this when you were talking about your clients, is that getting out there to talk means you can get content of you talking. So then you can start to build that brand. When you work with big brands for speaking engagements, they want to know two things. I mean, they want to know you're an expert first, but the other two things they want to know is that you have experience with other big brands and that they can trust you on a stage with their audience, right? Nobody wants you to lose your words in front of 5,000 people. So you have to take that step by step, right? And that was what that journey was for me. I started speaking at, I don't know, there was probably 200 people in the audience, the first one that I did. And then I grew and I grew and I grew. And in my new book, I actually write in the prologue about a moment, it was 2022, when I got my first proper speaking gig, right? Somebody put me on a plane and flew me business class around the world to an audience of 5,500, I think it was. And it was huge. And I walked into this event. It was in Bangalore in India. And as I walked in, it was actually really fun. As I walked in, all these people, it was dark. There were blue lights, like blue kind of strobes and hot spots coming down. And the organizer said to me, Mimi, did we tell you that it's a 360-degree stage? And I was like, sorry? She says, yeah, it's 360. And I was like, you mean like American Idol 360? She was like, yeah. So I got there and there was an audience the whole way around, which of course, as a speaker is quite weird because now your back is to people always. So I stood there and I thought, okay, so how am I going to do this? I speak about empathy. I need to see people. And I realized very quickly that I would just have to walk in circles, right, for 40 minutes of the keynote to make sure that I didn't have my back to people for too long. And as I walked up those steps, and this MC, she was from the television in India, so she was a TV host, and the lights were on, and she said, please welcome Mimi Nicklin, like they do in that big grand voice. And in that moment, I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I just felt that I had found my groove. And from then on, I used the content from that to get the next one, and the content from the next one to get the next one. And I still do that today, to make sure that people know that this is what my talent is. This is what I'm good at. This is what I love. And as I said earlier, I just say yes. And of course, many of them pay you. And sometimes if they don't, that's okay, right? We don't have to be paid because growth and value is not always financial.
Mm.
Sometimes it is, but not always. So yeah, that's my advice. My advice is momentum leads to momentum. So start today. Start somewhere. Start speaking somewhere, and then you can go from there.
And like you said, well, the growth and value that is a byproduct. The finance comes to is a byproduct of that. And yes, like if no one books you to speak, you can host it yourself, right? And again, you get the content from that. So like there really is no excuse. Like if that's your vision and that's where you want to go, you can do it. I mean, it's so interesting to see like speaking to so many CEOs and being around this environment is the same as myself is the passion, right? I can really see how passion is so important and how a lot that's one trait I see in a lot of people like yourself, high performing leaders is that passion for what it is they're doing in the marketplace, and when you just operate from there, you're unstoppable.
I think people can feel passion. In fact, I know it. They can feel it and they can see it. So, often people will say it to me from my audience, or they'll come up to me afterwards and they'll say, I mean, you are empathy. You are, it like comes out of you. And I think that, like you said, when people have really authentic passion, it's infectious. It
Mm.
could be passion for something you're not even interested in. I mean, you could end up at a conference and end up in a speech about, I don't know, yogurt making or something dairy that you're not interested in. But if the person up there is super passionate about their trade and their craft, you find yourself following. You're like, oh wow.
Actually ask you a question. I want you to think about this question. Are you an authority figure in your space? I know you're an entrepreneur, well, you're a solopreneur and you're determined, you're a thought leader. But the question is, are you an authority figure in your space? Because let's be honest, how are you going to separate yourself from your competitors? Where is your personal brand? And you know what? We have actually something very special for you. Follow me. You see, we have a scorecard, right? So you can actually evaluate if you're an authority figure in your space, because at the end of the day, when you separate yourself from your competitors. That is where opportunities come to you because your brand is strong. You have brand equity. So for you to actually see how long away you are from that, or if you're close there, the link in the description, you can fill out a scorecard. And this scorecard is amazing because it lets us know and see where you are. And it's just for free for you to actually see where your business is, where you are as a solopreneur, and how you're going to get to that level of being an authority figure in your space. Because you see, here at ETS Rubasha Media, I'm going to be honest with you, we are at limited capacity. We only want to be able to tailor our clients to the ones we know we can deliver value, because value takes time and we want to be able to work with your business. But the scorecard is actually just for you to see where you are and are you an authority figure? Think about it and we'll see you. Link in the description.
I never knew that about the dairy industry. 10 minutes ago, I didn't care, right? So we follow passion because passion creates energy, and as human beings, we're driven by energy. So where passion goes, energy flows, right? People come. And I'm lucky for me that I work in my passion, so it's quite easy.
I love it. Passion flows, energy goes. That's an amazing one. So, for the people who are watching, how can they apply empathy? Especially like you said, I think you said it earlier, 23% of organizations who use empathy increase profit, right? So like, and obviously I can see how that works. It's so understandable, right? And for us, you are nothing without your team. You are absolutely nothing without your team. I always see like I work for my team, right? It's up to me to, how can I help you? How can I be there for you? And it's so interesting because, like, for example, what I do, and I always just started documenting things. So like even with our team, everything is documented. So it's really powerful. So I just want to ask, how can leaders apply that empathy? Because once you can give that to your team and the people around you, and I think this then goes into your personal life. And then, like, it's so crazy how all of this really even comes back to your personal brand and how you admit that other people can see it, and people want to work for someone who they can see that through. So how can people apply empathy? Because I think it really is truly powerful, and I can see why, you're a star.
Thank you. Fundamentally, empathy is about listening. I mean, there's many ways. We could do a 3-hour masterclass, but we won't. So, if I had to say one thing, it would be to really work on your listening, and to ask yourself when you're sitting in a meeting with your team, or you're meeting clients, or even you're with your family. Ask yourself often, am I listening to understand, or am I listening to reply? Because most of the time we are on autopilot and we are listening to reply. So I'm listening to the person talking to me and I'm thinking, well, I'm going to have to tell them that that's not going to work and the timelines are all these things you're thinking, right? So that as soon as they finish, you can say, okay, well, my opinion is we can't do this and we can't, so you are not really listening. You are listening for your gap to reply versus for the information or the insight that they are sharing. So the first thing I would say is to really work on your listening skills. There are lots of courses as well out there now that can help you with this. And within that, if I was going to give you like 3 tips to be a better listener, the first thing I would say is to listen with your whole body, not just your ears, right? So eye contact, leaning forwards, not weirdly, but just lean into the conversation. I mean, I'm doing it with you right now. And if you watch the replay, you'll see, right? If I had had the conversation over here like this the whole time, just said yes, and it's very different engagement from what I've been doing, which is to show you like I'm listening, I want to know, like I want to be here with you, right? So use your body, square your shoulders, look at people, number one. Number two, really focus on your presence, which is part of the same, which is, remove distractions, get rid of your cell phone. When we have a cell phone on the table, even if it's face down, the quality of the conversation drops by 60%. So remove the distractions, stay focused, be in the room, even if you're online, be in the room with the people. And then the third thing I'd say is ask questions. Whether you are the CEO or you're the most junior person in the business, or you're at home or in your community or your religious institution, wherever you are, ask questions, because curiosity is the key to understanding. If you don't ask, how will you ever know, right? So if you want to become a more empathetic leader, boss, or just teammate or friend, ask questions, lean into people and tell them, I would really like to understand. And once you start practicing that, it becomes more and more habitual. The last three words of my first book are practice creates permanence. So the more you use the skill, the more easy it is to use that skill.
Mhm. Wow, so powerful. And even like on a personal note, how can you continue to practice this empathy? I mean, all the things you're saying are so important, even when it comes, for example, with the listening, like podcasting. I think to like one thing I learned so much kind of came a little bit natural, but I actually had to learn it by reflection is, listening. When you're on a podcast, not listening to talk, no, but truly listening and being present in the moment, like you said, really with your body, that puts you in the present. So, like, I could really relate with what you're saying. But one thing I found is a weakness is yes, I can have empathy in the workplace, but when it comes to family, it can be a bit harder. And I don't know why. Shouldn't it be the same? So how does one now like, and I know you can apply the similar things, but because when it comes to your family, for example, me, I'm so loving and I just, I'm very passionate in that aspect for the people I love, but sometimes you see certain things and it's like you get frustrated because it's like, well, I want them to be better. I want them to be able to grow and be in this space, but maybe some people don't want to change or stuck in their same ways. And, that can sometimes affect me, even though it shouldn't. I'm always focused. But yeah, how does one, when a CEO who has so many things on the line and, your most vulnerable state is in usually within your family or the people closest to you,
Yeah.
so. Mm,
Look, I think the secret kind of, I don't know, thinking around this is that empathy is not about judgment and it's not about agreement. So it's a really kind of key thing to consider. When you are understanding the perspective of others, you don't have to like it and you don't have to agree with it. And it's okay to tell them that as well. So, I could say to someone in my family, I really disagree with what you're doing. I understand why you're doing it, but I don't agree. That's still empathy. I understand. Do I understand why they're behaving that way, why they're making those choices? Yeah, I understand. I don't think it's the right thing to do, but I understand why you're doing it, right? So, probably one of the hardest questions I've ever been asked, Sugira. I was working with the Metropolitan Police Service in London with the counterterrorism unit. And I should have planned for this question, but I didn't. And in the Q&A, they asked me, Mimi, can I empathize with a terrorist who has just blown up London Bridge? And I was like, whoa, right, big question. But of course, the answer is yes. Do you like it? No. Do you agree? Most definitely not. But can you understand how that person got to that point, from where they were born, how they were educated, the messaging they've been told, the life they've led to that moment? Yes,
mm,
you can empathize. And I think in our families, it's about that consciousness, right? And understanding that what they want or how they see success is not necessarily through your lens. Often we say, I don't know why you're not listening to me. And the other person is like, well, why don't you start by listening to me? you know so listening is a two-way street, and I think that judgment has this really heavy load. Judgment makes you feel like a bad person, right? But we all judge every day. It's how we stay safe, right? I judge whether I can cross the road or I'm going to get hit, how fast the car's coming. I judge whether if I eat this it's going to make me sick, or if I drink another glass of wine it's going to make me dizzy, right? We judge to survive. So judgment in itself is not a bad thing. To say to someone, you're passing judgment doesn't make you bad. It just means you have to learn when to suspend it and understand what that means for somebody else. And you're right, because we love our families and we want the best for them, we often have this intention to help by fixing. But what I've learned in my work is that acknowledgement is often far more powerful than action. Don't try to fix it for them, just hear them, listen to them, let them feel heard. That is often far more powerful, especially with children, by the way, or young people. And with teenagers and young people, if you try and do it for them, they're most definitely going to go the other way. So acknowledgement over action. And often what happens, you'll find, is people will say, "Oh, Sugira, thank you so much." And you think, "I didn't do anything," right? And then they go away feeling that they can make better decisions, feeling like a load has been lifted, feeling like you're really supportive brother, brother-in-law, father, whoever you are, right? Actually, all you did was listen. And that is why the coaching, life coaching industry is growing so fast. We are so desperate to be heard today. We pay people to listen to us. So that would be my advice, Segura, is just to really focus on that judgment and agreement lens, removing it, and just hearing what they have to say and not feeling the need to fix it, but just to listen.
Mm.
That
And
help?
yeah, yeah, no, definitely, definitely. And because ultimately I noticed as well, like, you can get into the habit of judging people, but I always had to keep reminding myself, like, you're only judging yourself. What you think about others, you're only doing it to yourself. Because when I make mistakes, when I have those moments, have that the same energy I have towards someone else, I have that to myself, and I don't want to judge myself. So like same as empathy. When you have empathy to yourself, you have empathy to others, the same thing. So I think that's really powerful. I want to also talk about a little bit on your background when you were in the branding and advertising space. I'm sure there's been some ways where you've been able to mix what you learned there into also you now running what you're running. So can you talk to us a little bit? What are some insights into like what you did in terms of helping clients advertise, and how can people who are watching, CEOs who are watching, apply some of those strategies and small things that you noticed to help them build their empires like you're building yours?
I love the word empire. I don't feel like I have an empire, but that's a great word. Let's go with it. Um, I think, yeah, I mean, I did sort of 17 years in the world's biggest advertising agencies, building brand stories and campaigns and that type of thing. And I think there's two things that I really learned, which I think are helpful maybe for your audience. The first is consistency. So the brands, I think of maybe Coca-Cola, right? Coca-Cola, and if I ask your audience what color is it, I mean, instantly they can say it's red, right? So if I said Pepsi, you'd say blue. So consistency is something I learned from that career, which is that when you are now launching your personal brands, when you're, creating your platforms or your businesses, we get bored of things way before our audience, like years before our audience. So, there might be days when I think, does anyone really want to hear about empathy today? But the reality is, just because I talk about it 24 hours a day doesn't mean my audience hears it 24 hours a day. So consistency is critical. Don't go changing what you're for. Someone said to me this morning in another meeting, it's very easy for me to be distracted and think, oh, well, I was doing this, but now I should do this. And then I'm going to do this. Oh, and I could do that. And what about this? Like, get rid of it, right? Find your, what we call swim lane, find your channel and just keep going. And I'm proof that it works, because now 5 years later, all the time, people will tag me on LinkedIn. People I have no idea who they are, total strangers, will see somebody else's post about empathy and just tag Mimi Nicklin, right?
Wow.
Because people know that Mimi is like the empathy person, right? So the first thing I learned from sort of big branding was consistency. Just keep going every day. Same thing. You can say it different ways, but the same thing. The second thing I think I learned was around authenticity, which you touched on as well earlier, which is that consumers, people that buy things, whether that's clients, B2B, whatever it is, people know when you're being real. So, don't try and be something you're not, right? If you are really good at copywriting, don't now try and sell design services, right? Unless you become a brilliant designer as well. People resonate with authenticity. And I think whether you're a big brand like a Coca-Cola or a Dove, or who you are, Nike, or you're a personal brand or a small business, people love authenticity. And I think I saw that throughout my whole career. Brand purpose wins. So Of course, you can do promotions. You can do a Black Friday sale or a Christmas sale or a, Ramadan offer. But in the end, what endears loyalty, what brings people to you over time is that consistent authenticity. Tell your story over and over again and do it authentically. And you'll win. You'll win and you'll win for longer because a promotion might drive your sales today, but then they'll just fall off again. You have to climb the cliff all over again.
Mm. And I think really when you operate out of that consistency and authenticity, it gives you longevity in the game. You're able to sustain that because the consistency, I also believe, comes from that purpose and the mission and the passion to say, listen, I don't care. No matter if my bank balance is zero, no matter if we're in 100 million in sales, whatever, this is what I'm passionate about. This is the mission, and I can keep going and I'll be there every single day. It's true when I think of empathy, I've just started following you on LinkedIn recently, but you come to my mind, right? Which is extremely, extremely powerful. So can you talk about a little bit about your journey on what were the steps that you were taking in your advertisement, in your marketing, with your podcast and everything that you're doing that later on led to results? Maybe you did have to delay gratification until you saw something because a lot of people, they think things come quickly, especially when it comes to personal branding. We tell our clients all the time, this is a long-term game. You're going to be thinking 20, 30, 40 years from now. So like, what were some of the things that you were doing that can help someone out there to build that brand and to build all these things of consistency and authenticity?
Well, I mean, I think consistency is a commitment in itself. It's not only a strategy, but it's also an execution. So you have to get up every day and do it, right? So I think that is probably one of the things that's really on my side. Like if you go back down, I don't know, my Instagram or my LinkedIn feed or whatever, YouTube, it never changed. Right. So again, what I learned from that advertising world, but is also in my execution, I consistently turn up every single day. So I think that is really really critical. I think the second thing that I really saw as valuable, and you just touched on this, absolutely, Sugira, is patience. Okay. Even for me, I have to remind myself on those really crazy days, this is a 10-year game, not a 10-minute game, right? Slow down, Mimi. Because it's very easy. I understand. I resonate with your clients, right? You craft your LinkedIn post and you make a really great image and you put it out and then you watch and there's like 1 like, 2 likes, 3 likes, right? It's very easy to get caught up in that algorithm, in the analytics, in the data. The data is important. You can learn from the data, but you can't live for the data, right? You have to live for, as you said earlier, the passions, and then you just have to master that patience. Not every post is going to win. Last week, for some amazing reason, our organic reach on LinkedIn was 122,000 people. Organic. This week, it'll probably be 70 or 60 or 50 or 40. Who cares, right? Because we're all humans, right? And people respond differently in different time zones and different countries and different weeks. So patience is important. And as I said, I wouldn't live for the data. I would use the data, learn from it. So go back and look, study which posts do well. I know now pretty well which ones work better than others. And by the way, that doesn't mean I don't perform the ones that perform less. I still put them up because they'll be important to me for something else, right? So, for example, resharing other people's posts in my world doesn't do particularly well from a reach or engagement point of view. Some people will look, some people will read, some people will click. But for whatever reason, in my brand, reshares never really works. But I still do it all the time because I'll reshare because it's important to me and I want to share that piece of content, or I reshare because you've tagged me and I have a belief in Sugira and his work. So I want to share his work and get that reach. Maybe it's not going to get 100,000 views, but it might get 20, right? So I think as well, being clear what you're doing and why you're doing it and sticking to your values. If I think something's important, if I talk a lot about education. I'm not going to earn any money from it, right? There probably is no money in education, but I'm a mum. And it's important to me that we have this conversation about empathy and education and teachers and how we change the next generation. So I put it out there. So, those are my values. And then I think the third thing, which my dad taught me, and when I was very young, I remember being really young girl, and he told me to make money, you have to spend money. And I never understood that in the corporate world. I mean, of course, you have a marketing budget, whatever, but it never really meant anything to me until I stepped out alone to build this platform. And I spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a year creating empathy. And for many of those years, I never got any of it back. I still don't most of the time, right? I believe it. If you want to change the world, if you believe in your product, your system, your service, you have to spend money to tell people because otherwise, how are they going to know? And there's all those statistics about how many startup businesses fail. And there's also statistics to support that they fail because they don't spend on growth. So you have to spend money to make money. If you want to make great videos, somebody has to produce them. If you want to make a great podcast, it's costing Sugira money. He's here interviewing me, which is an hour of his time that he's not doing something else. I'm not paying him to be here, right? So this is his investment. Then he's going to have to edit it and write a caption for it. And maybe someone's going to help him do that. So having a podcast, for example, and most of them fail, 80% fail, is expensive. It's not going to break the bank, but it's expensive. So I think that insight is really important for people that want to build their personal brands, is to know that what you are doing, just like Coca-Cola or Nike or Dove, is building a brand, and they will spend a lot of money. So I think, yeah, I would say consistency in my execution, patience, not living for the data, values, and doing stuff that makes sense to me and what I'm trying to do. And then investment, my own investment, time and money would be the four things that I say, probably with a, I don't know, magic-ish formula for getting to where we are now.
Powerful, powerful. So true. So many things to go off. And yeah, you really do. You really got to invest in it. And for example, like a lot of our we have a business because of that. Like a lot of our CEO clients, it's like, this is a podcast. This is your media company. So, they work with us to be able to help them build that, right? Because it is your brand. It is a long-term thing. So it's so true. And the ones it's really interesting to, again, you look at the people you work with, or your clients, and you really see that, like, that vision to know, like, look, you can see why they've got to where they are, right? People, you can see it. And all these things that you're saying is so interesting because I'm seeing it in our clients, right? You see all these little things, and there's a lot of things that our audience can learn from this conversation, which is so powerful. Before we leave, I do want to touch on a little bit on LinkedIn. You touched on it a little bit earlier. It's such a powerful platform. I mean, me and you are here talking because of LinkedIn.
Yeah,
So
so good.
powerful, and even again, like for me, it's like I say with our team, I got to be every hour of the day, we got to be on LinkedIn, literally like obsessed with it because you like the organic reach that you get, like you're in your target audience, especially if you're in the B2B world. So what are some, tips that and I've seen with you how consistent you are on LinkedIn and posting on there, and how have you seen that correlate to your business?
Mhm. First of all, I agree. I feel like a LinkedIn cheerleader. Like I totally agree. All of you listening to what Sugira is saying, I think it's a phenomenal platform. I also think that it hasn't quite reached its peak yet. So it's really worth the investment because you have a better organic reach on LinkedIn than you do on many other platforms. You touched on consistency, or just regular content sharing, which I think is really important. As you said, it's like a practice in my team. There's no ifs and buts. We actually post now 3 times a day, every single day, except for the weekend when we post once a day on the weekend. We know exactly when we post different content at different times of the day because I have different time zones. So I know, not science, but I'm pretty sure what works better in the East versus the West. So that's how we kind of make that work. And the big thing I would say about LinkedIn is that it's a mindset shift. And why I say that is, when you realize how great it is for meeting people, like us today, it no longer is like a social media platform. Because I think in the beginning, I always sort of felt a bit guilty for spending time on LinkedIn because I was like, oh, I'm just on social media. But what I realized, particularly in the last year, is that it's not just social media, right? This is a business tool. It is a media tool. It is a reach tool. And what you give it, it gives you back. It's the more you invest into it. So a significant part of my day, like you, every day is on LinkedIn. And I don't think that's like wasted time or like me doom scrolling, right? That is new business development. That is reach development. That is investment into the future of empathy and this platform. So I think it's a really important mindset shift to not see LinkedIn as just like another Instagram feed, right? This is a business growth tool. And as I said, the more you put in, the more you get out.
And like you said, it's not really like with these platforms being like I've learned, it's not being emotional about different platforms, but it's distribution, right? It's distribution. Like we don't, this is an unparalleled time that we have. Like you have distribution to the marketplace, and LinkedIn even further is that platform. And for like a lot of your clients and a lot of your business, people are on LinkedIn to learn. You're on LinkedIn to grow. You're in a different mindset than you are on other platforms. And so if you can now be on the other side of that, there's people out there who are struggling with their team. And when they come across you, like, yes, that's like empathy. That's one thing that we're missing, right? Like a lot of people's biggest issues is within their team. And that's why I think, what you do is so valuable and why you're speaking around the world, because that is like the culture in your business. That is a huge topic that people need every single day and people are struggling with. And so when you're on the other side of that, supplying, the content is just going to make you stand out and be that authority figure.
And the other thing I'd say, Sugira, and thank you, is don't think that just because people aren't liking or commenting that they're not seeing it. Because often I will go to conferences or events or something, and someone will say, "Oh, Mimi, I follow your every post, and I saw you say this, and I saw you say this," and I think, I have literally never heard this name in my life. So to me, they are not there. Like, let's pretend her name is Joe Blogs, right? I've never seen that Joe. I know because I look every day. But Joe is telling me she is watching, and I can tell she knows my story. She's like, "Oh, and I saw you post this thing about your daughter. Oh, and then I saw you were in Sydney." And she knows, she's reading every word. But to me, she was before then invisible. So I think LinkedIn also has a lot of passive viewership. They're not liking, they're not commenting, particularly if you're talking about the workplace. Maybe they don't want their boss to see them liking a post on psychological safety or whatever it is, right? But don't underestimate how many people see your content, even if they don't engage with it. So yeah, just stay optimistic that that content, as you just said, is distributing, is reaching people, and more people than you know are reading what you're putting out there, which is really positive.
Extremely positive. And I also love how you're very strategic on there. Like everything it's like it really is a science, right? Like I really love that. Like the time, everything that you're doing, how many days, like 3 times a day. I love that. And like, one on the weekend, really, really like, being strategic to the minor detail. Just to one thing to touch on LinkedIn, what do you see works the most when you post? Is it the personal stuff? Is it the business side? What works the best for you?
I think that the winning equation is personal plus education, which are the two things you said. So that's really, I guess, the combination that I try to push there. So as much of that kind of, and when I say personal, I think personal to me is not that personal to others, but things that are about my journey, right? So how I feel standing on stage, or opportunities I've got, or I've been invited to Parliament. That I'm not talking about like what I had for breakfast, or my motherhood, right? I don't put personal stuff on there, but I'm just talking about personal opinion on the leadership or the work that I'm doing, right? So it's got me in there. And then the second bit that I do is that educational content. So statistics, carousels, whatever, infographics, like you said, there, Segura, things that people can learn from. And I try to keep that very varied. So, if I post this week about empathy and leadership, next week I will perhaps talk about empathy and conflict. And the next week it might be around, emotional intelligence and Gen Z or whatever. So fundamentally it's the same education, but you're coming at it from different angles, because of course otherwise people are going to get really bored, like, ugh, not another post on that. So I think that is the winning combo. Make sure people know who you are as a leader, that personal content, but again, personal in the business world. And then educational inspiration. Just give people things that they can think about. 23% higher profit. They're like, oh, that's interesting. So I think that combination is probably, I was going to say the winning formula, but I'm not sure I'm winning yet. But certainly it seems to work. So
Mm. Amazing. I want to thank you so much, Mimi. This was really amazing. We could talk for hours. I now definitely envision the future like an in-person podcast, as we continue to grow, expand, I just love that energy, the passion, like you said, you can see it and feel it. And I think so many people are really going to love this conversation. And I just want to thank you so much. And I will put your details in the description for people to get in touch, high level CEOs, wanting to be able to instill a lot of these principles and values within their organization to, like we said, grow their empires and grow that personal brand as well. I think it all relates. So I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Well, listen, the thanks is right back at you. I'm so happy that we made it work and that you invited me and that LinkedIn brought us together. And yeah, for me, as I said at the very beginning, my passion is to spread empathy because I believe that the more the world talks about empathy, the more empathy the world will have. And conversations like this just help me do it. So I'm extremely grateful. Thank you for having me.
No worries, no worries. Thanks so much, Mimi, and we'll keep in touch. Bye. So you're wondering the value in being a podcast guest. Think about it. You want to build your personal brand. Is it important as ever? And coming on this show allows you to do just that. You're able to leverage our audience, but not only that, you're able to leverage the content from this podcast as you clock up the hours someone spends with you. The longer time someone spends listening to your story, your solutions in the marketplace allows you to do something special. It allows you to build a community and build a brand. You can leverage the community here, but you can also leverage the content from this show to be able to use where? On LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where you're going to shine. LinkedIn is where you're going to generate leads. So whoever you are, you want to come and tell your story. You want to be able to come in and be a guest that allows you to build your brand. Link in the description, we'll get in touch. So join our waiting list to feature on the Rubasha Family Podcast.
If you really enjoyed this video, make sure to click here, and I'm sure you're going to love that one.